Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you're operating in the food processing sector, you already know the big, unavoidable truth, right? Setting up a food irradiation facility requires a massive upfront capital investment. We're talking about highly specialized machinery, complex civil works, and a ton of supporting infrastructure. It is a really heavy lift that literally stalls out even the most promising ventures. But there's a powerful financial lever available to offset this burden, and that's exactly what we are going to unpack today. Under the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, or PMKSY for short, eligible promoters have access to the ultimate financial tool to actually get these projects off the ground. Okay, let's dive right into our agenda. First, we'll cover the PMKSY subsidy opportunity. Then we'll break down the financials, go over eligible costs and exclusions, look at qualifying entities and equity, and finally, we'll wrap up with the critical 2026 updates. Section 1. The PMKSY subsidy opportunity, easing the capital burden.
10 crore rupees. Yeah, you heard that right. That is the absolute maximum financial assistance ceiling the government is offering per project here. Listen, if you're an investor modeling your capital expenditures, this single number fundamentally shifts your return on investment calculations. It's a massive incentive, and it's deliberately designed to instantly offset the heavy financial strain of these highly specialized multi-product food irradiation projects. And remember, integrating that irradiation component isn't just a nice-to-have, it's totally mandatory to secure the specific assistance under the scheme.
Section 2. Breaking down the financials, grant structures, and caps.
So, knowing the cap is great, but you're probably wondering exactly what percentage of your bill the government will actually cover. Well, this brilliantly illustrates how those grants are structured. If you're building in a general area, your assistance rate is 35% of eligible project costs. But check out that massive jump to a 50% assistance rate if you locate in a difficult area. You also get that 50% rate if the applicant falls into specialized categories, like scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, farmer-producer organizations, or self-help groups. Now, regardless of the percentage, the hard cap always stays locked at 10 crore rupees. What this really means is that strategic location planning and clever corporate structuring can literally yield an additional 15% in government backing for your project.
Section 3. Eligible costs and exclusions. What qualifies?
Now for the fine print, because let's be real, that 10 crore cap is absolutely not a blank check. The PMKSY scheme is highly regulated. But the strategic takeaway is just how broadly you can build out your facility while still capturing that grant money. Yes, the core food irradiation units themselves are covered, mostly under plant and machinery and technical civil works, but you can integrate them with a whole ecosystem. We're talking mechanized sorting and grading lines, staging cold rooms, controlled atmosphere storage, refrigerated transport, even in-house product testing labs. You're maximizing your grant funding by building a complete value addition ecosystem right alongside your irradiation unit. But, and this is a huge but, here comes the vital warning. The government is definitely not going to pay for your everyday overhead. You absolutely must calculate your out-of-pocket expenses accurately because the scheme strictly excludes several major line items. You can't use the subsidy for land and site development, administrative office buildings, your daily working capital, fuel, general transport vehicles, preoperative expenses, or consultancy fees. For all those operational necessities, you're entirely on your own and you'll have to fund them directly from your own capital stack.
Section 4. Qualifying entities and equity. Capital requirements.
Okay, so who actually qualifies? The scheme is super broad. Individuals, FPOs, NGOs, companies, they're all welcome, with MSMEs actually getting priority. But honestly, entity type isn't the real hurdle here. The real challenge is the mandatory capital requirement. In a general area, you have to prove a minimum 20% equity infusion into the project alongside a minimum 20% term loan. Now, if you're in those difficult areas or fall into those special demographic categories we talked about earlier, that capital burden is sliced right in half to a minimum 10% equity and a 10% term loan. Bottom line, the government demands to see that you have substantial skin in the game before handing over any grant money. And please, whatever you do, don't make the mistake of assuming this subsidy approval is just automatic, just because you meet the basic criteria. It's not. Every single proposal is rigorously scored through a strict assessment process. Standard applicants must hit a minimum threshold of 60% on this assessment just to even be considered for the grants and aid. Now, for SC and ST applicants, that minimum scoring threshold is adjusted down to 45%. But the reality is, if your detailed project report isn't absolutely bulletproof, you just aren't going to hit these marks.
Section 5. Critical 2026 updates, deadlines, and compliance.
All right, this brings us to the mandatory 2026 updates, and this is where we really need to inject a sense of absolute urgency. First and foremost is the July 2026 corrigerendum regarding land. If you are setting up a standalone or an integrated multi-product food irradiation unit, you must have a minimum of 1 acre of land. And listen carefully, because the recent FAQs were very clear on this. This 1 acre minimum cannot be relaxed under any circumstances. No exceptions, not even for projects located in difficult areas. If you don't have that 1 acre, your project literally stops right here.
And this strictness, it extends directly to the Department of Atomic Energy regulations too. Because, well, you're dealing with active radiation sources, so you have to navigate this really tight 2-step process. Step 1, you absolutely must obtain either a signed agreement or a firm recommendation letter from the designated department agency. Step 2, if you opt for the recommendation letter during your application, you are immediately on the clock. You have to submit the finalized agreement within 60 days from the date of your project approval letter.
And speaking of being on the clock, the window for all of this is closing incredibly fast. Following the July extension, your absolute non-negotiable final cutoff time for submission is August 31, 2026 at precisely 1700 hours. The clock is officially ticking, guys, and there is zero margin for error in your final submission. Because the margins are just so incredibly tight and the requirements so complex, the source material explicitly highlights the strategic value of bringing in specialized help. A consultant doesn't just sit there and read the rules to you. They evaluate the financial impact of the scheme on your specific capital stack way before you commit millions of rupees. They provide a subsidy-oriented project assessment, basically making sure your detailed project report can actually clear those steep 60% standard assessment hurdles we covered earlier.
Specifically, the analysis points to Finraja Consultancy Private Limited for exactly this kind of rigorous, scheme-focused eligibility review and financial structuring. Look, if you want to ensure your irradiation project is actually subsidy-ready, you might want to keep their contact details handy for immediate support. You can reach them directly at +91 9373 114747 or just check out finraja.com/contact. So, which leaves us with one final absolutely critical question to ask yourself today. You know the 10 crore rupee upside, you know the exact equity requirements, you know the strict exclusions, and of course that non-negotiable 1 acre land rule. So is your project's financial structure genuinely robust enough? And is your documentation tight enough to actually capture this subsidy before that August 31st deadline hits? Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Get your numbers right, meet those criteria, and best of luck with your project structuring.